There's one other thing that's interesting is that, so if you're an out-of-state resident, you can get an Illinois concealed carry as long as the provisions of your out-of-state permit or license meets the criteria of Illinois. It means it has to have the same training, you basically have to meet all the same criteria. One thing though that's interesting, it's been in national news. I don't know where the status is, it hasn't passed yet, but there is a movement to reciprocate national carry. So what that means basically is that if you have a permit in New York or a license in New York to carry a firearm, it reciprocates in Illinois. That's not passed yet, but that is something that there is a movement. Just I just want you to be aware of that there is movement for that within the within Congress. So if you have a concealed carry, there's a lot of restrictions on where you can carry. Same thing like a FOID. A FOID allows you to possess the gun, but it doesn't let you possess the gun in your residence, but it doesn't let you carry the gun on the street. You cannot carry the gun in your car unless it is broken down properly and put in the trunk and the ammunition is kept separate from the gun. If you have a concealed carry, it's totally different. You can carry a loaded firearm on your person, but there are restrictions as to where you can go. So some of these restrictions apply. I haven't listed them all because it's a very lengthy list, but I wanted to kind of simplify it. But that applies to parks, schools, whether public or private, forest preserves. A lot of people go to the forest preserves. You cannot carry a gun on a person in the forest preserve if you have a concealed carry. Government buildings. So if you have a concealed carry, this building is owned by the village. This is a government building. You cannot carry a gun with a concealed carry license in this building. A lot of times you see those signs, which I'll have on one of the slides there. Those are for buildings that are not already prohibited. So an example would be if you were going to somebody's store and they had posted that sign. If you have a concealed carry license, you cannot carry the gun there. So daycare facilities. Here's an interesting one. Establishments that serve alcohol and more than 50% of the income is derived from alcohol sales. Pretty hard to figure out. You know what I mean? You walk into a place, it's a restaurant, you might think, okay, I'm getting food, they're serving drinks, you can't balance it. Probably err on the side of caution. You legally cannot carry it. Now, if you violate the provisions of this, you're subject to get your concealed carry revoked, and then you potentially could be charged with a criminal offense. So that's the sign I was talking about, displaying any establishment displaying that sign as designated by Illinois law, you cannot carry a gun. Some other places, just I want to mention stadiums, basically mental health facilities, libraries, airports, cannot carry firearms. Some people, I don't think they got the airport message. There's a lot of, I just went to last week I went to a briefing by TSA, and they were telling me how many guns they take out of airports. People, you know, they have concealed carry, they carry, but I don't know if they don't think or they forgot, and they try to walk through getting on a plane and they got their gun and they get arrested. And they're like, you know, you got a thing. So, wanted to touch a little bit about law enforcement carry too, LEOSA. So there's Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act that kind of happened after 9/11, where they allowed us reciprocity to, if you're a bona fide law enforcement officer, they term it a qualified law enforcement officer, where you have statutory authority of arrest. You can carry anywhere in the United States, including the U.S. territories. That doesn't mean we can fly on a plane though with our gun. That's restricted by federal law unless we're flying on official business, and we have to clear that with TSA before we board the plane. Follow all the requirements. The only people that can really fly on planes all the time, whether on duty or off duty, with their weapons are federal agents that carry firearms as a part of their duties. They kind of have a little bit of what I'd say carte blanche to do. But part of that though is just because you're flying on an airplane with a gun, there's criteria. You can't drink alcohol on the plane. You know, there's certain things you have to make sure you keep the gun concealed. So there are parameters that they have to follow when they do fly with a weapon. But one thing with law enforcement concealed carry, it's different than Illinois concealed carry. So because I'm a police officer in the state of Illinois, I have actually more latitude than under the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Carry Act. But if I go to another state, I have to abide by a couple things. One, I can carry the weapon, but I can't be intoxicated when I carry the weapon. That's one thing, or be under substance abuse. Those are restrictions. I still can't carry in federal buildings, can't carry on a plane. I have to abide by certain restrictions. But in Illinois, as you notice, if you have a concealed carry license, you can't go in a park in a school, and you can still do that as a law enforcement officer under the federal law enforcement carry. So it's totally kind of a separate statute. That's why a lot of times we, when the first Illinois concealed carry came out, we had told the officers, don't go get an Illinois concealed carry because your status as a law enforcement officer gives you a different exemption. So you have more latitude with that. So can you write the question down and I'll get to you afterwards? Is that okay? Sorry, I'm just trying to keep it moving along. So ownership and safety, again, the locks, I can't reiterate enough. I'll tell you a personal story. I remember I was 8th grade, lived in the city, grew up with a kid across the street, and he brought a .38 revolver into the house, and he's like, look, this was my mom's. And wasn't loaded, but either way, didn't go over, I mean, I told my dad, and it was not a good situation. And, you know, I was, you know, pretty much dumbfounded because that had never happened to me, you know, being in 8th grade. And he wasn't a bad kid, but he made a bad decision. Luckily, gun was not loaded and nothing bad happened. But I know being a kid, I'm a realist. Kids explore and they think they know, kids know more, you know, I mean, and I get it, they're sponges, but, you know, I have 3 children myself, and sometimes they think they know more than their parents, sometimes. And so I just have to say, for everybody that has kids here, just especially when they get older, they're a little easier to control when they're younger, but they do explore and they do like to check things out, and preventing that access is really huge. I can't enforce that enough. There's nothing worse than losing a life, and there's absolutely nothing worse than losing a child's life. After all, I mean, they're our future, right? So, one thing I wanted to talk about Illinois, we talk about concealed carry. We don't have open carry in Illinois, so somebody cannot walk around, even if you have a concealed carry, you cannot openly carry your weapon. So just wanted to kind of clarify that for everybody, that anybody walking down the street with an open gun shouldn't be happening. Unless they're, I'm sorry, what?
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement can, correct. Usually they're in uniform and they have some marking on them that says police, or wearing a vest, even if they're in plain clothes. They have some type of emblem on them, whether it's a raid jacket. So if you don't see that, and you see somebody walking down with what looks like a gun, call 911. I can't, it does happen. I mean, sometimes it happens with real guns, sometimes it happens with BB guns. Either way, you see anybody with a gun at all, don't assume it's legal. Pick up the phone and call the police. And if it happens to be a police officer, and they're not dressed right, believe me, their boss is going to want to know about that. So, one thing, we talk about kids, and how precious they are. Illinois has put on the books a law that requires, if you do own a gun in the residence. And it's interesting because this law applies to people that own weapons that have, obviously if you own a weapon you have to have a firearm or identification card, because if you have a gun and you don't have an FYD, you're already breaking the law. So you're already subject to a criminal offense. In this particular case, what they're trying to do is prevent people from under the age of 14 accessing a firearm, and then there's some liability held against the gun owner if somebody gets access to that gun. The only thing though is it's only a Class C misdemeanor, which isn't a very strict penalty, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion. I'm happy there's some restriction and accountability in the law, but I just don't know that a Class C misdemeanor, which is, as you can see, I put on there, it's a $1,000 fine and up to 30 days in jail. I'm not sure that's enough that we need to stress how important it is to make sure we don't allow access to younger people getting guns. I just think it's important. And frankly, people under 14 is where that covers the law, but how many 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds get a hold of guns? A lot. So that's one thing that does concern me. Concerns me as a parent, concerns me as a chief of police. And I think it should be concerning to the public. You know, it takes everybody in this room to just kind of keep an eye on what's going on and just kind of exercise, you know, due diligence and making sure. And I remember when my kids were little, they had friends come over, and one of the parents called and said, "Hey, you know, I know you're a policeman. Do you have a gun in the house?" And I said, well, "Good question." I go, I wasn't offended by it by any means. I go, actually, I go, you know, I had one gun that I carry to and from work, and then what I do is all my guns I kept at work. I didn't keep any extra firearms. I had one gun I kept to and from, and I locked it up. I made sure it was locked up and nobody had access to it. So, you know, I just think that that's something that as a parent, it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask neighbors. Parents are, you know, it's okay to ask. So. So guns, I mean, we talked earlier about, I showed you a couple examples of, or one example of a discharge with that FBI agent. Most often those discharges happen, a lot of times, everybody thinks the gun is loaded. They really do. I mean, it's unloaded. They think it's unloaded, and it turns out it's loaded because that's improper handling. A lot of that has to do with knowing the weapon, being trained properly, understanding what that firearm can do and what it can't do. I always do, even as a law enforcement officer, whenever I examine a firearm from one of my fellow officers, I always make sure they're handing me an unloaded gun, and I'm making sure if they hand it to me, I'll still check it. Even if they check it right in front of me, I'm gonna check it, because I wanna know, you know, double check. You know, it's not gonna hurt, and always make sure that weapon is pointed away from anybody. Even if you know that gun is unloaded, I don't care if you've checked it 10 times, the barrel of that gun should never cover, we use the term cover, should never cross in front of a person. That barrel should never cross in front of anything you're not willing to destroy with it. So you have to be cautious, okay? I mean, again, it's just something that I can't stress enough. People who clean firearms, accidents happen quite often. They always think the gun's unloaded, and you know, and again, a lot of accidents happen when there are, you know, substances involved, specifically alcohol. I mean, alcohol is a, you know, you're not thinking like you do when you don't have alcohol in your system. So people think, you know, some people handle alcohol better than others, but it's something that we just have to think about. Do not handle fire when you're drinking. It's the best way to avoid an accident from happening. So where do we keep firearms? Well, believe it or not, most people do keep a gun in a gun safe, but there's a lot of people that don't. You know, it's just something that people don't do, and people keep them in dresser drawers, they keep them in closets, they keep them under mattresses, they keep them under pillows, they keep them in cars and trunks and glove boxes, under car seats, and we've had incidents where cars get stolen. For those that are residents, we've been pushing an initiative to, you know, lock your car doors. Well, we've had incidents, not recently, but we've had incidents in the past where they leave their key fob in the car door can't lock, the car's unlocked overnight, the car gets stolen, and then you come to find out, by the way, I had a gun in the car. So now the person that stole the car has a gun, they have your car, most likely they're going to commit another crime with that car, and now they have a gun to do it with. So again, it's really you have to make sure you secure that gun. Again, secure it with a gun lock, but lock it up in a box if you can. It's really the best thing to do. So it says reasons for owning guns. I found out some statistics recently. Most people, and I kind of think that this is geographic based. The statistics I found have varied. Excuse me. I think depending on where you live in the United States, some people own guns more for hunting, some people own it for sport shooting, some people are just avid collectors. So, you know, there's, and protection. But a lot of people that carry for protection, I think a lot of them also, you know, they do sporting with it too. And frankly, some people carry a gun for protection and they probably shoot not as much as they should, which is where things kind of go sideways, because it's like anything. As I get back to training and use of firearms and understanding your weapon, and if you do own a gun, just making sure that you train with it, just like a baseball player. You get to know things much better that way, and there's less of a chance for an accident happening, less of a chance of you using that gun, even if you intend to use that gun, less of a chance of you making a mistake and making a bad decision. So shooting the wrong person, or, you know, those are all things that we see every day, and we can't train enough as law enforcement officers. So I know that people that are carrying guns that lawfully can carry with concealed carry, they're probably not training as much. Some are. Some people have they have a good hobby. They go to the range, they shoot. They're very avid shooters. But most people are not. Most people that can legally carry a gun. And then there's the ones that are illegally carrying guns that they're not training with that weapon. So, I mean, they're just, they don't. And some are pretty bad shots. So, as I kind of said, these are kind of rules. I hate to read from PowerPoints. I just kind of use them as a guide, but you know, keep your ammunition separately. Obviously, keep the guns locked up. Always point the muzzle in a safe direction, which, as I said, don't let the barrel cover somebody. Double check the firearm to ensure that it's when you hand it to another person, and then facially checking it. You know, you should never. You know, I've seen people where you check the gun and you hand it to them, and then they check it, and the guy's like, "Well, I just checked it. Why are you checking it again?" Well, I want to know I'm safe. You know, it just makes sense. One thing, this is interesting, use the correct ammunition. I've seen plenty of times where things have happened where they use the incorrect ammunition, both good and bad. Bad being that they use ammunition that's too powerful for the gun that they're shooting, and basically that can create a big problem, because the way that cartridge is charged with gunpowder may be too excessive for that gun to handle. But I've also seen cases where investigating shootings where a firearm jammed because the person that was using the gun had the wrong ammunition, and it caused the gun to jam. And luckily for the person that was the intended target, it did jam because the gun didn't function, probably saved their life. So, but if you're an avid shooter and you want to be a legal gun owner, please use the correct ammunition. Use what, they tell you what's recommended. You can go to a gun shop, they'll explain everything to you. A lot of times, usually bad things happen sometimes with people that are lawful gun owners and into guns that reload their own ammunition. Those are where sometimes issues happen. But most of them are pretty on top of what they do. They know what they're doing. But sometimes an accident does happen.